Chapter 301, Show Home. Dominic led the merchant to the newly built apartments, where he was greeted by Jerome Wall, the fugitive son of a noble, whose hands were now beginning to look properly calloused, with the ingrained dirt of a man who worked hard for a living. "Oh, Your Grace, what brings you by the apartments this morning?" he asked. "The Merchants Guild wanted to see the new Magitech that we will be producing for sale." "I don't suppose that you live here, do you?" Dominic asked. "I do. Would you like to visit my unit? It will be easier than getting someone by to unlock a vacant unit," he suggested. "That sounds good. We won't delay you long. We just need to see how it is set up and working for the residents so that the guild can value them," Dominic explained. The fallen noble nodded and led them down the building to his unit on the top floor. It was simple inside, with just a bed and a patched table, both of which had been recovered from a damaged house. They had carpenters in town now, but Dominic didn't know what sort of schedule they were on to make new furniture, and some things were just too bulky to have shipped by merchant caravan for a reasonable price. "It's not much, but I've got a freezer coming and the new cabinets have plenty of room," he explained, somewhat sheepishly. Dominic had missed the large pantry cabinet in the corner by the door, but now that he was paying attention, the long dresser along the far wall was newly built. So, that was what Jerome had prioritized. "Well, the light in the middle of the room is obvious. What else were you planning to produce and sell for the guild? Everything Magitech? I just realized I haven't cleaned the privy in some time," he asked. "Just the fireplace insert and the lights to start with. We won't need to poke into your personal space too much." While Dominic spoke, the merchant was already inspecting the light on the roof. "Excellent craftsmanship, and such a simple design. Is that a cloth lampshade? Brilliant. Simple, but effective," he noted. Dominic nodded. "Just the thinnest of cloth that we had available. We will have to import more when we start mass exporting, but our order should also include a large number of farm animals this time, including sheep. It might not be conventional to have the guild serve as a cattle drive or sheep herders, but we can't spare the people for a 400-kilometer escort right now." The merchant waved off his concern. "I got the message already, and the guild has specialized trailers for that purpose, so we don't have to walk them the whole way. It saves a lot of time, but more importantly, it saves a lot of stress on the animals." Then he went to check the fireplace insert and briefly lit it. "Oh, a nice even flame. Is that just a Magitech orb set into a fake log?" Dominic chuckled. "Brilliant, isn't it? It looks like a stoked fire, so nobody tries to put wood in it by mistake, but a simple Magitech orb to create a small fire is simple to create, and we will be able to have trained workers produce them all day. The logs are fired clay, and we might make the next batch a bit thinner than these ones. They're durable, but a bit heavy. It's not an item that needs to move or carry weight, so it can be thinner without hurting anything." The merchant nodded. "That would be best. They're going to be heavy when shipped in bulk. There is no need to make them heavier and overload a caravan tractor. These are precisely what we will need for the common folk. Your man gave us an expected price range when he proposed having us run a high-security convoy here to get the first batch in a month, and if you can keep to that, then a long-term deal is definitely a possibility." Dominic nodded in agreement. He would have to talk to Julio and see what sort of price he had suggested to them. If it was in line with the actual cost and selling price, it should be fine. But the Castellan worked for the guild for many years. He should have a good idea of what the items were worth without undervaluing the workers and the materials. "Thanks for letting us check your unit. We will head back and let you get to work," Dominic informed Jerome. Jerome nodded, then sighed. "Off to work it is, then. I'm at the sawmill now, running the planking saw. An important job with all the work that we've got coming to us." Dominic agreed as they stepped back outside. The merchant took a moment to look around the town, which looked more like a construction site from this side. All the houses on this side of town were burnt down, with a large apartment development around where they were standing. "Excellent work rebuilding Wistover, Your Grace. It's coming along far more smoothly than I had expected. We were all prepared to start shipping refugee tents, but you've managed to house everyone who was sent your way," he noted. "For now, we're keeping up. Though after this batch, we will be short again until we can get a few more buildings up and some houses repaired. It's an ongoing process." But as long as we get the regular orders and those livestock in the next month or two, we should be fine. Dominic agreed. I will make sure that it happens. I will also get a convoy with extra security for you headed this way, set to arrive in a month, if you think that's enough time for the first shipment. Dominic nodded. We might not be at full production, as it takes time to train the workers, but I can guarantee that we'll have at least a wagon or two worth of items ready to ship by then. Even if he had to do most of the Magitech himself, he could manage to get that much done. Chapter 302 Genealogy. Once the merchant was gone, life returned to its calmer, productive state. Dominic spent his days working on enhancing the sorcerer's spellbook and making Magitech orbs for the lamps. The ladies of the Veiled Maid Corps were incredibly adept at making the clear quartz crystals that he needed, and the only part that Dominic was making himself was the light orb. The factory was going up smoothly, and it would be ready in plenty of time for the next caravan. The actual shell of the building had only taken one afternoon, but the workbenches and training were taking longer. They were close to getting the training completed for the initial products, though. The techno-wizards had all but shut down their shops so that they could train the new workers, though there was a qualified Magitech engineer in the last batch of arrivals. They were skilled, but the two in town had 40 years more experience than the freshly promoted journeyman. It all worked out in the end, and Dominic was told that the new arrivals were getting highly efficient at their tasks. However, he hadn't been out to see much of the training, as he was spending all his time in the library, working on his own training. There was so much old knowledge about magical weapons and Magitech hidden in here, even when the books weren't directly about it. For example, the tome that he was reading now was actually a history book about the region. Dominic had chosen it hoping to learn more about the villages that he hadn't seen as a child. But what he found was a detailed list of local heraldry, equipment types, and formal rituals for when local nobles met each other in different circumstances. It was like the etiquette book that he had been forced to memorize twice now, both as a child and as a royal sorcerer. But it was more personal, so that the reader knew the background of the exact people it referred to. It even had pencil-drawn pictures of important people. This would have been updated every generation, and Dominic saw handwritten notes on many pages, where the person in charge of a territory had been changed mid-generation. He also learned a few interesting new facts about the earldom. For example, the earldom itself belonged to the Wavemates royal family, and it was officially considered a vacation home. So, the territory hadn't officially been part of the earldom, but part of the Empress Dowager's dowry, which had been passed to the royal concubine and her child. Though, that didn't make any sense to Dominic, as she didn't have any children that he knew of. Then he flipped the page and found the notation. Earl Wistfield, brother to concubine Tatiana, succeeded by daughter. The name had been inked out, but to the sensitive sight of a dragonkin, the two different inks were not identical. However, it took him some time to make sense of what he was seeing. He is quite sure that was his mother's first name there, but from all other records, she should have been the Earl's younger sister. Upon doing mental math, Dominic realized that was highly improbable. For one, the woman he knew as his grandmother would have been 80 years old when his mother was born. Even if she were dragonkin, that was well past normal childbearing years, and she was already widowed by then. So, if the generations were moved around by one, and his mother was the concubine's daughter, hidden in the family for her safety, then he was the grandson of the Dragon King. Dominic carefully flipped the pages and calculated the years. No, none of that added up at all. The concubine hadn't been recorded as arriving until his mother was already in her teens. Unless the daughter had been hidden with the family for some time before that, it didn't make sense. Alexis came in to find Dominic surrounded in a pile of notes, with 3 different lineage and genealogy books open. "What did you find?" she asked. "Bad math. There is a note here about the concubine having a daughter, but she didn't have one that was publicly acknowledged. Then when I looked into that, I realized that everything else about the family is wrong. Most of these birth dates are either clearly false or impossible. For example, my mother should have had me when she was 16, which sounds right, as it was just after she married. But, according to the records, her perfectly human mother, who married into the family, was over 80 when she was born. And from there, it only gets more and more nonsensical. So, I've spent the entire day trying to sort out my own family tree. I mean, I have one right here, but now that I know it's just the public version and nothing on it is true except the names, I need more information. Dominic explained. Alexis laughed as Dominic huffed in frustration. Well, that's normal for any royal family, isn't it?
She asked.
That's just it. Other than the concubine, we were so far down the Wavemates family lineage that even the Earl was only considered to be a distant branch of an ancient royal lineage. We still carried the name, as it was directly down through oldest sons of a dragon emperor 3 generations earlier. But before the invasion, that put him about 1500th in line for the throne. Dominic grumbled. What else did you find? Dominic shrugged. Someone in the family is likely to be the concubine's daughter, and it might have been someone in my mother's generation. There is also the possibility that the concubine came here pregnant with a son, who would have been a strong contender for the throne, but there is no record of the birth. Also, my father's name isn't recorded anywhere in the family tree. My name is here, see? But my father is simply listed as deceased, as if my mother gave birth as a recent widow. It would say unknown if I was born a bastard, but my father lived with us. Alexis frowned. The Wavemates royal family had secrets, that's for certain. But you've already found more details and inconsistencies than anyone else. Even my father thinks that the concubine had no children. Chapter 303, Carefully Crafted Lies. Alexis sat down next to Dominic and they both dug deep into the records left behind by the Earl of Westover about his own family. But Dominic was right about it all being a carefully crafted lie. On paper, it was all nice and neat. But when you went into the other record books, which had birth dates and records of home addresses, everything became one giant mess. It was clear that they were deliberately hiding the truth from anyone who might come looking. However, it was not clear why. The only glaring omission was Dominic's father. Every other entry had parentage, even when they were written as being expelled from the family lineage for various reasons. When she went searching through the records, Alexis even found a copy of birth records for the nearby commoners, left by the Earl's midwife and the local priest. It would have been essential to the locals that such things were recorded and verifiable should someone question an inheritance claim in the future. You could claim that a child was a bastard, or a foundling adopted into the family, and ineligible to claim any family assets. But if it was in the Earl's book another way, then the noble recording would be the official document. One of the most common duties of an established noble was to serve as arbiter and judge to settle disputes that couldn't be peacefully resolved between the involved parties. There are so many records here for families that no longer exist. Alexis sighed. Dominic shrugged. But we shouldn't get rid of the records, in case someone survived. If they come back looking for records of their families, they would appreciate it if we could provide them that knowledge. There aren't all that many noble manors standing. Most were burnt, or they changed allegiance and destroyed anything inconvenient in their records. Alexis nodded. I will leave them right where we found them. There is plenty of space for new records in the library. Now, are you going to hyperfixate on trying to find out what parts of your family tree are false? Or did you want to move on to a new project? Dominic chuckled. Well, I suppose one day is long enough to spend confused about the family dynamics of a family that no longer exists. Right now, the surviving portion of the family tree is only 2 entries long, and that's much easier to track. Don't you go giving me that look. No adding to the family tree before dinner. I'm hungry. Alexis reprimanded him.
Fine.
We can work on that later. I should also get some more weapons made this week. Pistols, rifles, spears. Enough to arm the people in case we're attacked again. I intended to make that a priority, then I got distracted by the library. Dominic agreed, though he could see that Alexis didn't completely trust him not to try anything before dinner. Smart woman. The next morning, Dominic stretched in bed, then squinted, and sent a pulse of mana to the curtains to slide them shut with a gust of wind from the heavy cloth. The new device was 100% worth making. But the original use of the device was also something that he intended to work on. It wouldn't take much to link a Magitech lock to the device so that you could have the door swing open automatically when an authorized user unlocked it. That was an excellent function for vault doors and other secure rooms. It would also let you more effectively hide safe rooms, as you wouldn't need a hidden lever or handle on the outside. Just hold the magical key against the proper spot, and the door would open. That was one of the many ways that people had escaped from the Dago's invaders, though the hiding spot was usually under floorboards, and furniture was placed on top to keep them from being noticed and opened. It wasn't optimal, but it was difficult to detect, and that was the part that mattered. The maid came in a moment later, then paused when she realized that the room was nearly pitch black. That had never happened before, and she had forgotten where the light was. Unlike most rooms, it wasn't in the middle of the ceiling. The bedroom had 2 lamps, one on either nightstand. Dominic chuckled as he sensed her confusion and opened the curtains a few centimeters, letting in enough light to move around.
Good morning, my lord.
The princess requested a special breakfast this morning, so I have come to wake you both up, she whispered. What special event did I forget about? Dominic replied quietly, not wanting to wake Alexis. It's the equinox today. A standard festival day. The maid replied.
Nice.
I thought that I forgot an important one. The maid smirked behind her veil. Don't make too many afternoon plans. There will be festivities in town. I appreciate that. I will shower first, give the princess a few more minutes to sleep. Once he left the room, Alexis opened one eye and smirked at her maid. Dominic was too easy to fool. As long as she didn't move, he just assumed that she was still sleeping, and she could hear all his responses from her maid's morning briefing. He was still as adorably idiotic as usual. The autumn festival was not a major event, but it tended to be one of the more romantic holidays. The weather wasn't so hot that you couldn't be outside comfortably. The rainy season hadn't fully started yet, and even in regions that didn't have year-round growing seasons, it was harvest season. So, everyone was as well-fed as they were going to get, and the day was perfect for activities. Dominic reminisced as he got clean for the day. The autumn festival was always a good time, and he knew a perfect spot to take Alexis this afternoon. He would go get some snacks for the trip, and then take the princess to the old elven treehouse outside of town to watch the sunset after dinner. He just had to pack in advance so that she didn't guess the surprise too easily. Chapter 304. Start early. Beth was one step ahead of Dominic and had multiple packed boxes ready, depending on what time of day he was planning to take Alexis out for a private adventure. What are your plans for the morning? Beth asked as Dominic slipped one of the baskets into his storage cube. In the morning, I am going to make a load of spears for the farmers. Then, I will come back for lunch and bring the princess out to the festival until dinner. Dominic decided. All right, that is easy enough to work with. I wasn't sure how many to cook for, as almost everyone is likely to be in town for lunch. Good point. With the festival going on, everyone will be out socializing. That was part of why I wanted to get spears made this morning. If I've got them, I can hand them out when everyone comes in for the festival, and I won't have to send someone to all the farms. Dominic explained. Beth just laughed. Give them to the innkeeper. He will see every man in town by the time the day is over.
She wasn't wrong about that.
The innkeeper was also the town's only bartender, and the only spot in town that even carried alcohol other than the wines you could get at the mercantile store. That would change soon, though. Billy Bob should have grapes already picked and wine fermenting. The first batches would have gone into barrels not long after he arrived, so there would be fresh vintages in the next month or two. Perhaps not the finest of wines, but they should be palatable enough. If there was one talent that soldiers learned on deployment, it was new and innovative ways to make cheap liquor drinkable. Well, that and the ability to sleep anywhere. What Dominic didn't realize that there was an actual winemaker among one of the groups, and he had moved to the hillside under the Baron's jurisdiction to take over the process. Though it might not be as lucrative as his own vineyards, it would still allow him to practice his trade and make a living. An excellent living if the production on the hills held up as well as it had for the last month. Pops was busy in the forge when Dominic arrived, but the 2-part mold for the spear tips was still sitting in the corner of the room where he had left it, and the tubing press was ready to go. It had become one of the most popular tools in the forge, as the architects needed so much plumbing for the buildings, and Pops was exceptionally skilled at turning out smooth and even tube. Making pistols again this morning? Pops asked as Dominic began to arrange the workshop and stoke his side of the forge. Spears first so that everyone coming in from the farms can grab one. Even one spear per family should make them feel better, and this batch should be enough that even the barony's farmers will be able to get one. I will make pistols later, since the guards all have one already. I also gave the hunters some rifles. Dominic explained.
Pops nodded.
So I heard.
They've been avoiding using them, though.
Most of them figured that it was better to bring some of the feral stock in alive to see if it could be domesticated, so they haven't been shooting anything. Dominic chuckled. And how did that go for them? They lost the argument and had to spear 4 wild pigs, and there are 2 very confused antelope in one of the paddocks, but they did manage to find a roaming water buffalo. The dwarf joked. The antelope could jump a 3-meter fence from a standing start. If they didn't want to be penned in, they wouldn't be, unless someone had managed to get a collar and rope on them. But even then, they would likely chew through it or pull the fence post from the ground trying to escape. The water buffalo didn't really need domestication. They were simply too mellow to cause troubles unless you forgot to feed them. The pair worked in relative silence for the next hour, as Dominic used clay to steel to transform spearheads and make shafts. Then he moved on to sharpening them and preparing them for the oil bath. All the practice paid off, and Dominic found that it was becoming significantly easier to complete the mana charging of the monster core-infused tempering oil than it was when he first started as an apprentice. But more importantly, the blue stripes in his trade skill core were becoming noticeable from a distance, marking him as an early-stage journeyman and not a late-stage apprentice. You really do have an affinity for the forge. I've never seen anyone go through the progress on a trade skill core like that before. Most would take years just to get through the apprentice stages, but here you are already showing blue. Pops congratulated him. It's all up to your expert tutelage. Dominic agreed, with a sly smirk. While it was true that he learned everything he knew from Pops, or close to it, Dominic felt that he didn't actually know all that much, and it was simply his affinity for magic that made the whole process possible. Even if he asked the farrier, she would know more about metallurgy than he did, and she was still only a level 4 apprentice. Dominic had a definite sense of imposter syndrome, but when he finished, he had 50 more spears, all level 5 uncommon grade magical items, which would cut through goblin hide with ease. All that he had to do was deliver them, then go get cleaned up before lunch, and hope that his wife wasn't too annoyed that he snuck out while she was sleeping to go work the forge. Pops smirked as he watched the changing expressions on Dominic's face. Relax, boy. She's used to you already. She's not going to yell at you too much for working on a festival day. Especially when you let her sleep in. You did remember to fix the curtains, didn't you? Dominic nodded. I made a Magitech pulley so I can open and close them from bed. Pops gave a short laugh. Well, that's one way of doing it. Common folk just run a string from the curtains to the bedpost so they can tug them shut. That would have worked too. He probably should have thought about that first, before going looking for a Magitech solution. Chapter 305. Sparring Dummy. Going with Pop's plan, Dominic dropped the bundle of spears off at the inn, which was already starting to fill with customers in for the festival and in need of a celebratory beverage. I've got spears for the farmers and anyone living outside of town. 1 per household until you run out of either farmers or spears. I don't know the exact number of households, but it should be close. Dominic explained before the innkeeper could say anything. Were the military supply stopped today? The older man joked. It's easier than making old General Ale to chase everyone down. You know that everyone is going to be by for a drink today anyhow, especially if they have an excuse to stop by. Dominic retorted. Good point, Your Grace. If you are taking the princess out for the day, don't forget to swing by in the afternoon. We're making candies, and they're almost ready. My daughter will have the stand set up out front. The innkeeper suggested. We'll be sure to stop by. Dominic left the inn and returned to the house, where he found that not only was Alexis not ready to head out, the house itself was basically empty, as everyone was taking advantage of the free schedule to practice unarmed combat in the backyard. He shouldn't have worried so much. Jasmine was watching from the sidelines, sitting in the grass, with goats grazing all around her. For a moment Dominic wondered how she had made peace with the animals. Then she tried to stand up, and the largest of the female goats headbutt her back to the ground. I get no respect around here, she complained when she noticed that Dominic could see her. One day, we will figure it out. Dominic replied with a shrug. He would have herded the goats away, but they had been let out to graze and keep the grass at a manageable height, which he didn't want to interrupt. As long as she was sitting, the goats didn't give her a hard time, Dominic noticed. They did go after the others who were training. With all the punching and kicking, that made everyone a valid target for the playful animals, except for Dominic. Are you going to train with them? Jasmine asked from her seat in the grass. Nah, they look like they've got all the help that they need. Besides, I'm better at fighting from a distance. Speaking of which, I've got something for you. I made a few extra pistols last time I was in the workshop, and this one is for you. I know that the Farrier's Forge isn't the most dangerous place in the world, but you are outside most of the day in the fields, and if something dangerous is getting close to the walls, a pistol shot will draw attention much faster than shouting. He explained. Jasmine gave an evil chuckle while glaring at the goats with the pistol in her hand, and Dominic bonked her on the head. Don't antagonize them even more. The trick is to make them like you and respect your authority, not to thin our herd. Besides, if you did, you would have to deal with the Blink cat. A cat who is currently napping on the wall of the garden, keeping an eye on its horn charges. The Blink cat might technically be a wild, magical beast, but it was excellent at its job. Alexis' voice called his attention to the training. Dominic, stop staring at my backside, and come over here. I need an extra assistant for the training. The ladies are practicing how to take down an armed assailant without blowing their cover, and you're closer to the level of combatant that they're likely to see from the average noble. Why do I feel like that wasn't a compliment? Dominic whispered to Jasmine as he got to his feet. Alexis tossed him a wooden sword, and Dominic tested the weight in his hands. All right, what do you need me to do? He asked. Just keep the ladies from restraining you. That's all. Remember that it's training and don't injure anyone, but other than that, fight as you normally would. She suggested. That was easy enough. But he also had monster strength and agility enhancements attuned to his spellbook, which was nearing level 13. The maids were all working without the spells, he assumed. That might not be true of the mages, but they were all acolytes, and hadn't had time to improve physical enhancement spell gems to a significant level yet. So, Dominic settled into a crouch and flicked a stabbing attack at the first of the veiled maids to approach melee range. She parried with a weapon hidden in her sleeve, and then retreated as two others approached, going for Dominic's arms. He was faster than they were, and those were also forced to retreat, but their teamwork was relentless, closing the space around him until using the sword was pointless. Unfortunately for them, this was the type of fighting that Dominic actually understood. He grabbed one by the front of her vest and tossed her into the crowd, then shifted into the open space that their collapse had made, giving himself a few more swings with the sword before the maids closed in again. Dominic went for the leg sweep the next time, but that was a favorite of the royal guards, and the maids were already well versed in how to block and dodge that. It didn't buy Dominic any extra time, and they weren't going to let him grab them for a toss again. What they didn't expect was for him to duck and grab one maid by the legs to spin her like a chain flail at the others while he laughed. That's just dirty fighting. Our dignified duke, using people as living weapons. If he were an ogre, I wouldn't be surprised, but I certainly wouldn't expect it of a noble, even if their strength gems did allow them to do it. Colonel Wilkes laughed. And that's why he's the one they need to pin, and not one of you. They're getting too used to your fighting style, and they need to know how to deal with amateurs using improvised attacks. Alexis whispered back. I can still hear you. Dominic called as he tossed the maid in their general direction. The woman landed on her feet with surprising agility and rejoined the effort to pin him. Next time, we will put candy in your pockets, so they have more motivation. Wilkes replied, laughing at the spectacle of a dozen women trying to catch a man who had all the agility and dirty tricks of an alley cat. Chapter 306, Solstice Festival. Unfortunately for Dominic, the outcome was inevitable. A subtly cast slowness spell took a second to break after hitting him, and that gave the ladies a chance to get both of his arms, while a third one tackled him by the waist, taking him to the ground. Excellent work, ladies. A bit slower than we had hoped, but you get the idea now. You just need to restrain them enough to get them on the ground, and then you can properly control the troublemaker to remove them from the room. Most of the time, the combatant will be drunk. That is when the problems usually start. But drunks can be unpredictable, and if there is one positive thing to be said about Lord Dominic's fighting style, it is that it is never predictable. Alexis congratulated them as Dominic got up and brushed himself off. All right, everyone hit the showers. And if your duties are done for the day, You can go join the festivities at the town site. It is the Equinox Festival, and I am told that they are setting up a number of games and events," Alexis announced. Nobody needed a second reminder, and they all rushed inside, eager to see what sort of events the townspeople had come up with. In some of the wealthier regions, it was customary for the local nobles to set off fireworks in the evening, but Dominic had completely forgotten that there was a holiday coming up, so if nobody else in the house remembered and ordered them from a caravan, there would be none this time. Well, perhaps not. He could alter the munition spells to create the equivalent of a colored flare that he could fire straight up in the air. With 10 royal guards, they could fire one after another and make something of a fireworks show. However, he would need to test that in advance, and that would ruin the surprise. "Will your festival plans be finished by dark?" Alexis asked. "The men of the Purity sect are planning to put on a show with magic, and I expect it to attract either monsters or wild beasts." "They can be. It's just a matter of timing. I was planning to watch the sunset, though," Dominic suggested. "Oh, not bad. Did you have a properly romantic spot in mind?" Dominic winked at her. "An old elven-style tree fort by the river. Rumor says it was made and enchanted by an actual elf. But it's got a great view down the water to the sunset." Alexis smiled. "And I take it that Beth prepared snacks and such already?" "But of course. I put them in my storage cube this morning so that I didn't have to sneak over to get it if we ended up delayed in town." "We can make that work. If we're in a tree stand at sunset, looking over the river, we should have one of the best views of any potential monster attacks. It might hinder our response time, but we might also see the movement in the distance first, thanks to the higher elevation." Dominic chuckled and kissed her on the cheek. "Such romantic notions. Now I almost hope that we do get to go pick a fight with some monsters in the dark." Alexis laughed. "Well, you might get your wish. Now, why don't we get changed and go visit the town? They should have a surprise ready for us." Dominic could already hear the excited voices of children, though the town didn't have as many of them as would normally be expected. If the kids were excited, then he knew that there was something fun prepared in town, but he hadn't been in Signia long enough to actually see one of the Equinox parties in action. The first thing that he noticed when they reached town were the makeshift stalls. It was set up like a carnival, with simple games giving out simple prizes. In a big city, they might be fancier prizes for a fee to play, but here, it was all candy and the games were either being played by children or young couples trying to impress each other. Someone had collected a bunch of finger-sized trout from the river, and people were trying to catch them with nets made of thin paper. It was a nearly hopeless cause, but it was fun and infinitely repeatable. That was the important part. Dominic and Alexis strolled past the first few games, arms linked while children ran up to say hello, and the locals made polite greetings. "Is it just me, or are there a lot of new pregnancies?" Alexis whispered after a few minutes of walking through the crowd. "Everyone wants to celebrate their arrival at a new home, right? It's an inevitable side effect." Dominic joked, but the number really was shocking. It wasn't just one or two, close to a quarter of the young women were beginning to show. The midwife was going to be incredibly busy soon, as even if they had attempted to organize such an event, it would have been highly unlikely to get this sort of result. Dominic stopped to buy them some strawberry-filled pastries, while Alexis was swarmed by young women asking for blessings. It was custom in many regions to ask the local nobles to bless your pregnancy, either because they actually had magic that might help, as Alexis did, or because it would let them know that a child was coming and that nothing untoward had happened that people were trying to hide. The bigger the town, the less personal these things were. But with only a few hundred people in total and a noble family of only 2 recently arrived people, that generational disconnect didn't exist yet. While Alexis was busy, Dominic went to help a group of young boys who were determined to get a fudge square for knocking over all 5 targets with small bean bags. The trick was that there was sand in the bottom of the vases, so you had to hit them just right on the top to get them to tip. It was a classic carnival trick, and the stall normally made a fortune when they were charging. Today, it was free. They would eventually give the kids the fudge, but pride demanded that they manage to knock down at least 1 or 2 of the targets before they would accept it. Chapter 307. Dance the Day Away. The games weren't the only attractions to the festival. As Dominic got closer to the town square, He could hear music to go with the laughter and shouting of the crowd. Though it was still early in the day, there was a social dance going on, and Dominic smiled when he saw the maiden's ribbons being tied to a pole in the center of the dance floor. "What are those for?" Alexis whispered, unfamiliar with the reason for the riot of color. "It's a wave mate's tradition. The ribbons will be stretched out to the edge of the circle, and unmarried young ladies of the proper age for engagement will hold one ribbon while dancing. As they dance, the ribbons twist around the dancer, pulling them into the arms of the young men dancing in the middle. It's a good excuse to get them dancing with each other, since they tend to be shy. But it's also a good way for parents to see which ones will make a good couple, and which are the attention-seeking sorts that draw the eye of all their peers. Not many parents want to marry their daughter off to a playboy, or their son to a scheming woman, you see," Dominic explained. Alexis nodded. "But if they're shy and just at the age to be engaged, not jaded by years in the palace, how do you get them to actually dance?" Dominic winked at her. "You get them drunk, of course. Just a little bit is enough to take the edge off, and then they'll start dancing. When I was young, most engagements were set around age 12, and then the marriage would come when they either finished school or she got pregnant and her father couldn't wait any longer to get them married." Alexis gave him an incredulous look, but Dominic just shrugged and tipped his chin toward the spot where Jerome Wall, the fallen Dago's noble, was flirting with Maisie Khalil, the young baker. While they were both properly grown adults, they were both unmarried, and Jerome made a point of coming into town every morning after the morning rush so that they had time to talk while he picked up a loaf of bread. Things looked like they were going well, and given another half a year, it was likely that they would end up married, even if Maisie's father didn't agree to the engagement today. If Jerome were smart, he would have spent some time making or buying engagement gifts before the dance today, so he could make it official at the dance. But he had arrived with nothing, and the woodcutters generally made a modest income. He might not have enough saved yet for a proper gift. "We should head over and say hello to the parents. The ribbon dance won't start until later tonight, but we should find out which families have children looking for partners. This first year is bound to be more than a little imbalanced, and I don't know how many will actually be looking for a partner so soon after arriving," Dominic explained. He made a good point. Most of the town's residents were war refugees, and many still owed debts to the Merchants Guild either for bringing them here or for keeping them alive before they came here. So, they wouldn't feel like they were in a position to get the next generation married off just yet. That likely wouldn't dim the enthusiasm of the young folks. It would just make the whole event less serious and give them a chance to meet each other. From the look of things, that part was already going well, and there were people dancing all over the town square. Alexis winked at Dominic and pulled him into one of the swinging dances, a favorite of guardsmen everywhere, and they twirled their way around the town square to the sound of fiddles and guitars. Then someone arrived with a drum, followed by someone with a saxophone, and the music changed to a slower tempo tune better suited to close dancing than the fast-stepping first beat. A few of the locals noticed that the Duke and Duchess were in the crowd of dancers, but other than avoiding bumping into them, it didn't change anything. Dominic and Alexis weren't the sort who would insist on some obscure formal rule that only they would have known in advance. After that song, Dominic and Alexis stopped at the edge of the square, where Omar Khalil was finishing the arrangements for the ribbon dance and some replacement musicians to arrive when the first group needed a break. He was currently the wealthiest businessman in town if you didn't count the techno-wizards or the artificer. Those had probably made more money, but the Khalil family mercantile store and farms were doing very well. I doubt that you will need to worry too much about musicians. I saw plenty of men with pan flutes and guitars in the crowd. They'll hop in the first chance that they get, so they can impress the ladies," Dominic joked. The former town guard captain smiled at Dominic. "Your Grace, good to see you today. I'm just hoping to make today as memorable as possible. Everyone is here, including the residents of both baronies. I hear that there will be a fireworks show tonight as well, and that should make for a great close to our first festival." Dominic nodded and kept Omar's attention as Alexis quietly drew the man's wife away for a private conversation. "Indeed. I am told that the men of the Purity sect are planning to put on a show tonight. There is a small chance that will attract unwanted visitors, but we shouldn't have many folk out and about in the middle of the night. I will be watching for trouble with the princess, as I got an evening planned down by the river. Just remind your family members that festival days are a favorite of troublemakers. Dominic informed him quietly. I understand, my lord. I might not be on the town guard anymore, as I've got the family to run, but I've been working with the general on the rotations, and we will have men out in pairs tonight, the same as every other night. We just made sure that it wasn't any of the ones with good prospects or who are already married. Omar explained. Perfect. Now, I should prepare for the evening's festivities. Chapter 308. Quiet Nights. Now that he was separated from the princess, more people came to greet Dominic, and the next few hours slipped by in a rush of laughing dancers and friendly faces. Then Alexis returned, looking pleased with herself. We should head back to the house for dinner before our evening plans. The ladies think that we should get a good spot by the river before sunset, so that we are in place for the show. That was a subtle way of saying, don't show up at the ribbon dance and intimidate or distract the girls. While Dominic wasn't stupid enough to think that it was a good idea, it wasn't uncommon for nobles, especially Dago's nobles, to take multiple concubines and also bed most of the maids in their employment. If they got pregnant, there would be a significant payment. So many lowborn and impoverished girls saw it as a steady job with a chance at a huge bonus. And none of their mothers wanted to encourage that sort of thinking by having a married noble at the singles event. That was a large part of what the ladies had talked about while Alexis was gone. The rest was a discussion of how money and supplies were coming along, now that they were getting ready for the rainy season, where wet roads, high winds, and frequent childhood illnesses would keep nearly everyone around the house for months at a time. The men had already prepared, and the lowland fields were planted to rice, which grew perfectly well in flooded fields. By the time that the rice was grown, the weather would be better, and the fields would naturally dry. A perfect crop for otherwise unusable fields. There was only one more thing that they were hoping for, and that was glass jars for canning. The elder Mrs. Aylater had mentioned that she could can and preserve much more if they simply had more jars. However, shipping empty canning jars wasn't cheap, and the jars weren't expensive. So, the Merchants Guild only brought a few cases at a time, just enough to keep up supplies in the general store. Not nearly enough for a large expansion of the storage style. I think that we can sort something out. With the transmute stone spell, you can make glass. It's not normally considered the best, or even a good way to use the magic, but glass is a form of volcanic sandstone, so it is possible. If we fill a form with dirt and transmute it, we can make plenty of jars. Then they'll just need copper lids and seals. Someone should know how to do it, but until the buildings are finished, I don't know if we've got enough mages. I can ask the artificer and the steam fitter if they have the spare time. They're not idle, but they're less busy than most of the others. Dominic suggested. Alexis smiled. I was just going to suggest paying the premium to fill a whole caravan wagon with jars. But if we can make them here, that's even better. From what I'm told, the old women of the Stantia province are soup people. Dominic chuckled. You have no idea. For most of them, 730 jars of soup is their canning goal. 2 a day, every single day of the year. If a meal other than breakfast is served without soup, it's either a light snack or they're nearing starvation. As if speaking of it had manifested soup, the first thing that Dominic smelled as he approached the manor was potato bacon soup cooking. Alexis noticed a few seconds later and began to laugh. That doesn't count. Palace dinners start with soup. They're not just soup and bread. Dominic shrugged. Same thing, just fancy. However, as Beth knew they were headed out for the evening and almost everyone else was already out of the manor, it was soup and sandwiches for dinner before Dominic led Alexis down to the river to the hidden elven tree fort. He smiled as he saw the familiar old wooden fort in the trees, with the carefully grown steps grown out of the tree trunk itself, leading upward.
Here we are.
Would you like to go first? Or should I lead the way? He asked. Alexis looked around, then upward. Where are you even going?
She asked.
To the tree fort? Dominic gestured up, and Alexis waved her hand. There is nothing up there. It's just an oak tree. She informed him. Dominic winked at her. In that case, climb on my back, and I will lead the way. Alexis laughed as she wrapped her legs around his waist and threw her arms over his shoulders, letting him wear her like a backpack. But the laughter stopped 5 steps up the tree when the whole view changed, and there was a massive and ornate tree fort immediately above their heads. What the? It must be hidden with magic. How did you even know this was here?
She asked.
Well, that explains why nobody else has found it or claimed it. I used to play here as a kid. Dominic explained. The tree fort had been built as a fire watch, Dominic realized. He hadn't noticed as a child, but it was at the top of one of the tallest trees, which had been grown with magic to support the weight. There wasn't much in the old tree fort, but Dominic had prepared a padded mattress, soft sheets, blankets, and a low table to place their evening snacks on. Alexis smiled as she saw him setting up the preparations for a romantic evening, complete with small Magitech lights set in the corners of the upper floor, where they would watch the fireworks before retiring back to the interior level for the evening. It was just a low glow, setting the atmosphere as they looked out over the trees and grasslands of the duchy. Dominic wrapped an arm around Alexis as the sun vanished beneath the horizon, and the last of the residents of the baronies hurried home. They should still be able to see the show easily enough, but they didn't want to be caught on the road after dark. The first explosions of the fireworks show gently shook the forest, as the mages used explosion magic to add impact to the sparkling lights. Not a bad plan, Lord Dominic. Alexis whispered in a sultry voice as the fireworks drowned out the sound of the celebrations. You know, with the disguise spell on this fort, nobody can see us. Chapter 309. Welcome, brother. Alexis laughed as Dominic kissed her awake the next morning. You are incorrigible. What are people going to think if I head back to the manor at dawn, Linthing?
She teased.
That we actually found that monster fight you were hoping for? Dominic replied with a smirk as his hand traced idle circles on her stomach. Speaking of which, we should head to the top floor and make sure that there really aren't any monsters coming. This place is actually perfect as a watch station. You can see the whole duchy from here, if you've got sharp enough eyes. She insisted. Speaking of seeing the whole duchy, there is an incoming caravan from the Signia side of the border, and it's not a merchant guild caravan. 2 trucks, plus 100 cavalry riders. Definitely military, but I can't tell who from here. Dominic noted as they reached the top of the stairs. Alexis turned to see what he was looking at, but couldn't make out much more than movement on the horizon until she took out a spotting scope. It's one of my brothers, I think. The lead truck has got the royal emblem on it, but I can't make out much more than that. She agreed. Dominic turned to scan the woods and grasslands, searching for anything that might have been attracted by their light show last night. There wasn't anything obvious, but there were a lot of places for monsters to hide, and even the best vision couldn't see through trees. If they had an airship they could scan from above, Dominic realized. That might have to be their next project, unless they wanted to make some Magitech river barges. Those would be valuable as well, but to the west, the closest major city to the river was Coster, and it wasn't directly on the river. So, they were actually the last stop on a river barge tour, unless the Merchants Guild put a trading station at the highway north of Coster. But downriver, they had Castle City, Darden, Skypington, Burton, and Signia City all easily accessible from the water. Assuming you crossed the lake and took the Fyholton River to Burton, that would make the plan to sell the barges financially feasible, even if they weren't in the best spot for trading. But that could wait until they had their first factory online. Getting shipbuilders to Wistover to make either the airships or the river barges would take some time and steady access to resources, neither of which they had in abundance. We should head down and get freshened up to meet with your brother. Or it could be one of your sisters. But it does seem more likely that it will be one of your brothers come to visit with a cavalry unit to search for the leftover Dago's miliary units and the herded monsters. Dominic announced with a sad sigh. You say that like you're not looking forward to clearing out any sign of Dago's soldiers that you find. Alexis retorted, with heavy sarcasm in her tone. Oh, that's not the issue. Just that they're going to want me to work when I've got so many better ideas on how to spend our days. Dominic blew a kiss at Alexis as she arranged her clothes, and she rolled her eyes at him. Single-track mind. Feeling the steps vanish beneath her hands as she got too far down the tree was an odd feeling, and Alexis ended up needing to heal her fingers after she slid the last 5 meters to the ground. Well, that was unexpected. Even though I know where it is, I still can't get to it without assistance. It looks like it's only accessible to certain people. She commented as Dominic followed her down. That is strange. But now I know that it's the perfect hiding spot for us to have a quiet night out. Nobody will bother us because nobody
can
bother us. That's actually a good point. Having a hiding spot that is hidden with magic is a huge advantage when we're trying to ambush something or keep watch for threats. Even if Dago sent spies, it won't matter if they can't see our lookout. Alexis realized. In that case, I should put it on my daily route. It doesn't take me long to get to the top and look around for threats, and that's a bit better than nothing. With the river and the grassland, we have a pretty good line of sight to the east, but that's not the most likely direction for threats to approach from. Dominic agreed. Just family members and merchants. Now, we really need to hurry if we're going to be ready to greet them when they arrive. She wasn't joking. By the time that they got back to the manor, showered and Dominic had tossed a robe on, the caravan was already nearly at the gates. Trucks are too fast. If we hadn't seen them when we did, I would still be in the shower. Dominic grumbled as he prepared to meet them at the gate. Stall them for time. The princess is still changing. Julio agreed. She had the veiled maids to help her, but she also had much more work to do to get ready for guests than Dominic did. Dominic didn't recognize the heraldry, but if his memory was right, it should be for either the 6th or 7th Prince of Signia. Either way, the man who stepped out first was not someone that Dominic recognized. Introducing the 6th Prince of Signia, Lord of the Northern Marches, Commanding General of the 6th Royal Reserve Cavalry, Prince Russell Cygnus. The prince stepped out of the carriage, short blonde hair and icy blue eyes marking him unmistakably as a member of the Signia royal family. Nobody else looked quite like that, but the 6th prince in particular looked nearly identical to his father. Prince Russell, welcome to Westover. It's a pleasure to have you here. Please, do come in out of the sun. Dominic greeted him. Is my sister preoccupied? The prince asked in a cold tone, barely looking at Dominic. Yesterday was the solstice festival, so her schedule started a bit late this morning. She will join us in a few moments. Dominic assured him. The prince simply nodded and strode past him, headed straight for the house, while the staff scrambled to get everything ready for a royal visitor. If only they had sent word ahead, it would have all been ready. But now that they were traveling by truck, there simply wasn't a faster vehicle in most convoys. Chapter 310, News from Home. Alexis strode down the stairs from the upper floors just as her brother stomped through the front door. Little brother, so good to see you again. How is the Kyrian borderland treating you? She shouted before flinging herself into his arms and laughing. You evil imp, have some decorum. What will the Duke think of us? And when did I become your little brother? Prince Russell replied in a stiff tone. Unlike your mother-in-law, Lord Dominic isn't much of a stickler for the rules. But what brings you all the way across the country with a military convoy? Where is Dominic, anyhow? Did he stay to get them settled? She replied. He was currently doing that, with the cavalry headed to the stables to have hooves checked, as they were all mechanical horses and didn't need feed or brushing. He had informed the cavalry that the barracks were currently empty and they could rest there, with the trucks parked inside the walls for security. While Dominic got the soldiers settled, Prince Russell carefully inspected Alexis for any signs of injury or mistreatment. It wouldn't be easy to find if she wanted to hide it, as she could heal herself. But that took energy, and he seemed more interested in whether she was being well-fed or not. Those clothes are new, are they not? I don't recognize the style, he asked. They were made by the local tailor. Quite stylish and comfortable for casual wear around the house. The local fashion is a bit different from it is on your side of the country, but I like it. Alexis agreed. So, you're not suffering here in this recently settled backwater? I am told that there were no people at all in the region when you arrived. Russell asked. Alexis smiled. There was one half-troll and his human wife. They're just outside town as our doctor and midwife. Well, one of the midwives, as we have more of them now. Lord Dominic has some solid connections with the Merchants Guild, and they have been bringing us all the specialists and farmers that we could want. Our father asked that the duchy manage to work enough land for subsistence and build a population within 2 years. But we've already got hundreds of residents, with more coming and 2 baronies who are taking some of the overflow for us. That is a large part of why I have come today. My unit had just returned to the capital when we were sent back out with official news, but also with a proclamation for you and the Duke. Alexis made a get-on-with-it gesture, but her brother just sighed. The royal decree has the Duke's name on it. I can't open it until he is in the room. Dominic chuckled as he entered. Very noble of you. I usually just cave to her demands, so she doesn't beat me. For a moment, Dominic could have sworn that he saw a smile on the taciturn prince's face, then it returned to his default professional mode. Perfect timing, Duke Dominic. I have here a royal proclamation. Russell replied, then broke the wax seal and unrolled the message. In recognition of their exemplary efforts to repopulate the wilderness regions of the Stantia province, the Crown does hereby expand the lands granted to the Westover Duchy to 20,000 square kilometers, encompassing 200 kilometers of border territory between Stantia province and the former Signia frontier. This territory will extend for 100 kilometers upriver, centered on the point where the Westover River meets the Stantia provincial border, near the Westover Manor. He began, then paused, as the extent of Dominic's new holding sunk in. No longer could they call it a glorified county. However, the shape of it suggested that there was a chance it would be expanded again, toward Limpsbury and the main highway. Territory that was largely uninhabited and unclaimed by any nobleman for the last decade. Dominic only saw one small issue with that allotment. There was never any population there to speak of, only a few scattered baronies and demi-human villages. But should there be an increase in hostilities from Dagos, he would be the first expected to reinforce both Limpsbury and Coster. If the Dagos army simply bypassed the 2 cities, it would also have them marching straight through his duchy to get to Castle City again. He needed more people again. With this much land, a force of 20 trained soldiers wasn't going to impress anyone who wasn't intimately familiar with the situation. Fortunately, he now had more than enough farmland to invite every displaced farmer they could find. Even if they lived a rural life, most would not complain. In fact, the further they were from noble oversight, the happier many of the demi-humans would be. Alexis nudged him, and Dominic realized that he had forgotten a step. I humbly accept His Majesty's proclamation. Dominic informed Prince Russell, who handed him the scroll. Then the prince walked over to a sofa and took a cup of coffee from one of the veiled maids. There is more, but it's not in an official message. The armistice is complete, signed and recognized by every nation that borders Signia or Dagos. However, that will not be the end of their problems. Dagos is in a state of civil war, officially. King Gustav declared it 3 days ago, with an execution order for Prince Kaizan and his supporters on charges of treason. Most of the northern peninsula is in open rebellion, and Kynwyn province is now under martial law. Or, I should call it the Kynwyn Governorate, as it is currently under the direct control of the new Duke of Albrols, who is serving as governor, while King Gustav rules Albrols City. The situation in Dagos is going downhill fast, and the army is being redeployed from the battlefield to the Stantia province's major cities in expectation that the war will start to expand again if King Gustav doesn't manage to hold on to power. He explained, then paused and stared at his cup. Where did you get fresh roasted coffee? This is wonderful. Alexis laughed. We have a garden witch. With her help, even growing coffee beans on the manor walls isn't impossible.